One of the reasons why women can be more physically aggressive in minor ways in a relationship is because everyone knows, the wife and the husband equally, that the consequence of the physical aggression is much more limited. So men do more serious damage to women, but women are more aggressive in relationships. You go out and you look for the person in 20 who has the highest levels of negative emotion. It's much more likely to be female than male. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out why. First, size differential emerges between men and women at puberty, right? Because boys and girls are roughly the same size and roughly the same strength, but men get bigger at puberty. Their upper body strength is much higher, and that's a real issue for combat, because human beings punch. We're not the only people that punch, but we have clubs on the ends of our arms, and so that's how we defend ourselves. And so if you have a lot of upper body strength, especially across the shoulders. Now it is the case that if you look at the statistics for physical altercations in marriage, women attack their husbands more often than the husbands attack their wives. And the women know that if they hit their husbands, nothing's really going to happen, right? Because if you're if you're a woman about that high and your husband is, say, my height, unless you hit me with an object or something that's sharp, the probability that you're going to do me any serious damage is pretty low. But the reason that women are higher in sensitivity to negative emotion is because the world is actually more dangerous to women, right? Because that would be the most logical reason. Well, first there's the danger of physical altercation. Second, there's the sexual danger. So women become sexually vulnerable at puberty. And why do I say vulnerable? Well, it's straightforward. It's because the cost of sex for women is way higher than it is for men. If a woman has an unwanted, unwarranted, or incautious sexual encounter and she ends up pregnant, then, well, in traditional societies, you're just done. I think women's nervous systems are adapted to the mother-infant dyad. And because you are not the same creature when you have an infant, not at all. You're way more vulnerable. And it's partly because you have to express the vulnerability of the infant, and you also have to care for it. Imagine what you need to be wired up biologically in order to care for an infant. First of all, they're very demanding, right? Because they're completely helpless, and they're demanding 24 hours a day. What you do to an infant under 9 months is when they're in distress, you always respond. You never tell the infant, get your act together and stop whining, right? Which you can do, say, to a child that's 18 months old. The price that women pay for that ability to have an intimate relationship with infants in the very earliest stages of development is that their nervous systems are actually wired so that they can perform that role optimally.
Female bullying can be unbelievably vicious, and usually that takes the shape of reputation destruction, innuendo, and gossip. It's well documented. People look at aggressive and antisocial behavior in women and in men. And in women it tends to take the expression of innuendo, gossip, and reputation destruction. And in men it tends to take the form of outright physical aggression. Look, women have to express aggression somehow unless you're willing to say that they're not aggressive. They tend not to do it physically, not to the degree men do, so they use other channels. And what other channels are there other than physical aggression if you're going to be aggressive? Well, you go after people verbally. Women manifest aggression towards themselves and to others, but they don't use lethal force. They don't use physical force the same way men do. So they have to do it some other way. I don't think that people are good or evil. I think they're both. I don't think that culture is security or tyranny. I think it's both. And I don't think that nature is benevolence or catastrophe. I think it's both.
How should a wife treat her husband? And how should a husband treat his wife? It's impersonal. And it's partly, you don't put your partner down in public. Why? Well, it's not because you're hurting that person's feelings. That's not why. It's that you're denigrating the relationship that you are in voluntarily. It's certainly possible that you married barbarian witches. Fine. But you're so lacking in sense that you would discuss that in public. Not noticing that you picked them. You help your wife figure out how not to make a fool of herself in public. And she extends to you the same courtesy. And it's partly maintenance of the sacred nature of the relationship. You're going to pay a price for speaking up, but you're going to pay a price for not speaking up. So it's like monsters on the right, monsters on the left. Pick the ones you want to battle with. If you decide not to make your stand, you weaken yourself. Let's say we're having a conversation and it's flowing melodically, and all of a sudden I say something and there's a disjunction, right? You're offended by it. There's some negative emotion that comes up. Well, that's where the information is. It's like something went wrong, something didn't work out, I'm not looking at the world properly, or I don't know you well enough, or as well as I thought. But that's where all the information is, because as long as what we're doing is working, then we both know enough already. As soon as what we're doing together isn't working, then that's instant evidence that there's something about us that needs to be updated. And what should you do when you make a mistake? Now, one answer is catastrophic dissolution. That's a collapse into chaos. Well, no one is going to pick that voluntarily. Let's put it that way. It's unbelievably unpleasant. If you really collapse into chaos, not only are you overwhelmed by negative emotion, but the positive emotion system shut off, and that's what happens to someone who's extraordinarily depressed and also hyper anxious at the same time. Not only are they suffering from an excess of negative emotion, but they've got no incentive movement forward. And you see people like that all the time. Their error has come along, blown out their frames of reference, they've collapsed into the underworld, into the chaotic underworld, and they don't know how to get out. They have post-traumatic stress disorder, or they're depressed, or they're hyper anxious. The other solution is, we're talking, and I don't get what I want from you, and so I say, you better not do that again. I don't want to see that from you again. And so that's a tyrannical attitude. And I'm going to say, you go along with this, or I'm going to punish you. And now there is an element in society, like society is made up of threats like that to some degree. We've organized a set of punishments and threats that keep each of us in alignment. However, generally speaking, in a society that's functional, we've decided to adopt agreement with that set of principles more or less voluntarily. There are intelligent ways that punishment and threat can be used and bounded. But that can easily degenerate into tyranny. Women also underestimate the degree to which men are terrified by women. The most probable answer to the question, will you give me your phone number, is, are you kidding? So the probability of rejection is very, very high. And these women that have all these things going for them are also terrifying targets for rejection. And men also assume that, well, they must be flooded with requests. And they don't even bother. Women's lives, particularly complicated in my estimation, is that they have to solve all the complicated problems of life in the time from the age of 20 to the age of 35. And men just don't have to do that. So the pressure isn't there for men. There's almost nothing less valued than a young man. But that starts to change as men move towards their 30s if they're successful. Whereas there's almost nothing more valued than a young woman. But that changes as women move towards their 30s.
the personality attributes associated with femininity, so that would be agreeableness and higher levels of negative emotion, were also both independent predictors, but so were symptoms of personality disorder. Women whose relationship with men has been seriously pathologized cannot distinguish between male authority and competence and male tyrannical power. Like, they fail to differentiate because all they see is the oppressive male. We're also increasingly dominated by a view of masculinity that's mostly characteristic of women who have terrible personality disorders and who are unable to have healthy relationships with men.